Hey guys, Britt here. Welcome to End Times Bible Prophecy. Make sure to hit the subscribe, like, and share buttons. Well, the world is at a historic crossroads. We're living in a world preparing for war in a way we haven't seen since World War II. And I want to bring a couple of stories to your attention today. The first one is this one from Zero Hedge. It says Russia says peace treaty talks with Japan impossible over unfriendly Ukraine stance. The Kremlin has announced that Japan's anti-Russian course means that peace treaty talks remain impossible at this point, according to the words of a senior Russian foreign ministry official quoted in TASS. It is absolutely obvious that it is impossible to discuss the signing of such a document, a peace treaty, with a state that takes openly unfriendly positions and allows itself direct threats against our country, the official said. The two countries have long been locked in a standoff regarding competing territorial claims over islands off northern Japan disputed since the end of World War II, but which have come under increasing militarization by Russia. For example, Russian forces have just in the last month deployed new missile defense systems in the disputed Kuril Islands as part of what looks to be a semi-permanent forward positioning of troops, specifically a mobile coastal defense missile system on a northernmost island in the chain, Paramashir. Russia knows the island chain as the Kurils, while Japan calls them the Northern Territories. Russia has long been denounced by Japan and its allies in the West for sending military assets there. The Soviet Union had annexed the islands during the final days of World War II, and the status of ownership of the islands, which Russia de facto currently controls, is still unresolved, and as a treaty regarding their status has been subject to on-again, off-again negotiations with President Putin. As for the fresh Kremlin statement on Japan's unfriendly positions which make negotiations impossible, this appears a reference to Japan joining the Western initiative to impose sweeping sanctions on Russia over its invasion of Ukraine. So here in this picture, we can see these islands. We see where Japan is located. We see Russia. We see this is right in the middle and why this would be disputed, but it also shows us the close proximity of these nations. It shows the global reach of this war in Ukraine, because remember, Japan imports somewhere around 80% of their energy. They have energy fossil fuel projects ongoing in Russia. So Russia can see this as to its strategic advantage to try to peel off a Western ally by pushing them. Remember, Russia said friendly nations will get Russia's resources. Unfriendly nations will not get the same resources or will have to pay a high premium to get those resources. So there's leverage here with Russia over Japan and trying to peel Japan out of the United States Western alliance. I don't think that's happening, as we'll see as we go on, but it's definitely making sides be chosen on Ukraine and what side are you on, whose side are you on. Goes on, it says Tokyo has also moved to cut its dependence on Russian oil and coal exports over the past months. In November, Russia's ambassador to Japan lashed out at both Tokyo and Washington while describing that the unfriendly action from the Japanese side, unfortunately, worsened our relations greatly, and now the future of our relation is uncertain. So guys, we're seeing the world break up into these different blocks. We see Russia, China, all the BRICS nations aligning on one side. We see the United States, Japan, South Korea, Australia, Europe, Canada, all aligning on another side. But this is what we saw during two world wars at the beginning of the 20th century. We saw a line was drawn in the sand and you were either on one side or another. Not many countries were neutral in those conflicts, and it became a global war. And we're seeing the same thing now. We're seeing this positioning for war. And we have what I believe is a very large development as a result of all of this. So here we have in this next story, this is from Money Control. I've never heard of that publication, but the article goes into Japan and its stance, which it's now changing for the first time since World War II. It says, is Japan still pacifist? What would a change mean for the region and the world? Prime Minister Kishida has argued that the world is at a historical crossroads, and Japan must act urgently to acquire counterattack capability. So it says, after adopting a controversial defense doctrine that has raised serious concerns in the region, Japanese Prime Minister Kishida has decided to travel to the West to explain what forced Tokyo to shift from its decades-old pacifism. Kishida is on a week-long trip to France, Italy, Britain, Canada, and US, all of these nations we just talked about. It's being on one side against essentially the BRICS nations, Russia, China, and all of their allies. While the ostensible reason is to discuss the forthcoming G7 summit in Hiroshima in May, a major focus of his talks is on the deteriorating security situation in the region and Japan's new defense doctrine. Kishida will meet with President Biden on January 13th on his first visit to Washington since becoming Prime Minister in October 2021. In a significant shift, Japan adopted the new defense doctrine on December 16th that allows it to shed its post-war constraints on the military and acquire counterattack capabilities to target potential threats. It also intends to strengthen operational coordination with the United States. So Japan is building up its military, it's changing its stance, it's changing its doctrines for the first time since World War II. It says the reason for the fundamental shift stems from developments that led to a deterioration in the security environment of the region, while Russia's invasion of Ukraine alarmed countries in the Indo-Pacific. The worsening of the U.S.-China relations over Taiwan and North Korea's constant nuclear and missile threats have only added to the concerns. Kishida broke a long-standing taboo by raising Japan's defense budget to 2% of GDP. For years, Japan had limited its defense budget to 1% of GDP. The increase puts Japan at par with NATO's defense spending, and it actually makes Japan number 3 in the world in defense spending, behind the United States and China. In the next 5 years, Japan is estimated to spend over $315 billion to acquire weapons and defense capabilities. The National Security Strategy said Japan faces the most severe and complex security environment since the end of World War II because of attempts to unilaterally change the status quo by force. Japan fears that what happened to Ukraine can happen to Taiwan, and given its proximity to the Okinawa archipelago, Japan would be involved in the conflict. Taro Oso, former deputy prime minister and a right-wing leader, asked, if Japan is attacked, who will defend it? And guys, that is a key statement right there that we can read a lot into. I believe one of the pivotal moments in foreign policy over the last several decades occurred in August 2021 when the United States simply pulled out of Afghanistan, leaving allies and citizens behind at the mercy of the Taliban. Other nations watched that. That was not an orderly withdrawal. It was not a withdrawal that had concern for the security of the people left behind. It was a simple abandonment of Afghanistan, and the United States, their allies, whether it's NATO or whether it's Japan or anyone else, Saudi Arabia. We've talked about how Saudi Arabia has pulled back from its U.S. relationship following that. Japan also is dependent on the United States military for its security, and they saw that event, and I'm sure they thought, will the United States come to our aid in the event of a Chinese attack, a North Korean attack, a Russian attack? We need to defend ourselves. So this goes on. It says, The Japanese Prime Minister argued that the world is at a historical crossroads that requires Japan to act urgently, although he stressed that Japan is a peaceful nation and its path will remain unchanged. So, what's going on? He sees the environment in the world today, and that environment is saying the world is aligning for war, guys. That people are picking sides. In fact, the world, I would argue that World War III began long ago. We've talked about that in past videos. It just hasn't become a kinetic, hot shooting war between the major nuclear powers. But we see all the world's focus and attention on Ukraine and the pouring of weapons into that region. We've seen the sanctions that were levied by the West on Russia, and we've seen who's decided to participate in those and who has said they won't. And it's created a very fine line in the sand saying, are you on the side of Russia, China, and the BRICS nations, or are you on the side of the United States and its Western allies? And it's dividing the world into two parts. And there are, I'm sure, ongoing cyber attacks all throughout the world. There's financial attacks. We've talked about some of those. And I believe that will be the ultimate undoing before this probably ever comes to a shooting war. I think that the financial war will be won against the West. And we've talked about that coming into the year with the financial crisis and the depression that are going to be coming on the world in this year. So I think that the leverage lies with the BRICS nations and their ability to destroy the Western fiat financial system and ultimately win this war. Nevertheless, the Bible is very clear. It tells us there will be a World War III, an all-out shooting war, World War III. That's in Revelation 6. It tells us that the rider on the red horse will bring war and slaughter to the entire earth. So we know there will be a World War III, and contrary to conventional wisdom, World War III will not be an existential threat, meaning the nuclear war will not destroy the entire world. So many people would say, well, how is that possible? How could China, Russia, the United States, Europe, all these nuclear powers engage in an all-out war and not destroy the planet? Well, the answer to that is as simple as looking at past warfare. Just as horses, cavalry became obsolete in warfare, just as, hot air balloons flying over the battlefield and dropping bombs became obsolete in warfare, so too will the use of nuclear weapons become obsolete in warfare. When will that happen? I don't think we'll know until we get to that Revelation 6 scenario, because once the doctrine of mutual assured destruction is overturned and one power truly believes that it can conquer the globe without fear of nuclear retaliation, they will move forward and do that. And that's how we'll find out that we've reached that point. But we are approaching that point now. And while we do that, we see the world aligning for war and getting together. So whether this happens this year or several years down the road, when we look at World War II, there was a whole decade of buildup to World War II with a bunch of disputes along the way that eventually erupted into war and every nation having to pick sides. I think we'll probably see the same thing here. I don't necessarily know that we're going to see Revelation 6 play out this year, but we are getting closer and closer all the time. And the closer we get to that, we're even closer to the rapture, because I believe the rapture occurs before the tribulation. So what do you think, guys? Is this all a sign of a buildup to that future World War III scenario? I believe it is. I believe we're seeing this happen right now. Regardless, this is major, major developments. We're seeing the post-World War II order just simply breaking apart. I know that we had, the Soviet Union, United States Cold War for a long time, and that ended 30 years ago. But now we're seeing a whole new change where the United States as lone superpower is gone, and we're seeing the world bifurcate into these different coalitions, these two different coalitions, two different sides, and actively talk about and engage in proxy wars in Ukraine and wherever else, but bring themselves to the brink of war. So we're getting to that point. So again, let me know what you think. Leave your comments below. Make sure to like and share this. God willing, I'll see you on Monday. Bye. If you want to learn more about the end times and Bible prophecy, make sure to sign up for my free monthly newsletter and get your copy of my free ebook, 7 Signs of the End Times. Just follow the link in the description to get your free book. Also, make sure to check out all of my books. Just look up Britt on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Apple iBooks, Google Books, Kobo, or anywhere books are sold. Thanks for watching today, and until next time, keep your eyes fixed on Jesus, the author and perfecter of our faith.